Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of CSAR in conjunction with the Institute for Manufacturing. This new departure for IFM is a series of lectures on industrial innovation policy. And we're very pleased to have Lord Sainsbury to talk to us about his rather radical views on what needs to underpin modern industrial policy. So now I'd like to bring in Lord David Sainsbury. It's often said that people need no introduction, but many people will be aware that Lord Sainsbury was Minister of Science for 7 years, inherited a science establishment that was in fairly shaky state, and over 7 years got real terms government increases in funding for science, which I think much of the science establishment continues to be grateful for. In recent years, however, Lord Sainsbury's turned his mind to the nature of industrial policy, not always a popular term, but from his huge experience, he's put together a new way of thinking about the economics which underpin industrial growth, and he's going to talk to us about that this evening. Lord Sainsbury, please.
Right, thank you very much for that. Can I first of all say that I don't think I need a cochlear implant now, but I have reached a stage in life where it's very reassuring to know that people like Lekman Lee are standing in the wings, ready to help. I thought it was a brilliant presentation, and I was really delighted to hear it. What I want to talk about this evening is innovation as the engine of economic growth. I think since the 1990s, the G7 group of countries, of nations, comprising the world's largest industrial economies, have all shown declining rates of economic growth. For example, in the period between 2010 and 2019, the UK had a very poor record of economic growth, with an annualized rate of growth of output per hour averaging just 0.4%. The neoclassical economists who advised the government have not, however, been able to explain why our rate of growth has been so low, referring to it often as a productivity puzzle. In February 2020, for example, the Centre for Macroeconomics at the London School of Economics asked its panel of top UK economists about the cause of the UK's slow economic growth rate. Their answers were frankly all over the place. The two most frequently cited factors were low demand and labour market factors, but productivity mismeasurement and a skills shortage were also mentioned. This is an extraordinary situation. When faced with one of the most basic questions in economics, why do the growth rates of countries vary? The economics profession is saying it can't agree on an answer. In these circumstances, we need, I believe, a new theory of economic growth. And in my book, Windows of Opportunity, How Nations Create Wealth, I've put forward what I've called a production capability theory of economic growth, in contrast to the neoclassical market efficiency theory. The GDP of a country is calculated by adding together the value added per capita of all the economic organizations in the country, most of which are, of course, firms. The rate of growth of a country is therefore determined by how fast the firms of a country increase their value added per capita, and this is something we know a great deal about. We know that there are two ways that firms can increase the value added per capita. They can use innovation to increase their production efficiency, and they can use innovation to increase the competitive advantage of their products, which enables them to charge their customers higher prices. Henry Ford's development of mass production, or Taiichi Ohno's development of lean manufacturing at Toyota, are examples of using innovation to increase production efficiency. While Steve Jobs' development of the Apple iPhone or Nicholas Hayek's development of the Swatch watch are examples of using innovation to create competitive advantage. This is why I think it's correct to describe innovation as the engine of economic growth, and to agree with Joseph Schumpeter when he dismissed the pedestrian view that it's capital per se that propels the capitalist engine. Because in recent years, economists have argued that capital is the source of growth, we've sent money to pre-manufacturing Africa, capital that cannot be profitably invested. German and American economists 100 years ago would have understood that the lack of a competitive manufacturing sector in Africa is the cause of the poverty rather than the lack of capital per se. As both the conservative Joseph Schumpeter and the radical Karl Marx agreed, capital is sterile without investment opportunities that are created by technology and innovations. The ability of firms to innovate in turn depends on their capability to take advantage of market opportunities created by new technologies, new customer demands, or both. This will vary between sectors because both technology and customer demands are sector specific, which is why the value added per capita of sectors vary, and why, if we want to understand the growth performance of countries, we need to look at what is happening in different sectors and at any shift of economic activity between sectors with different levels of value added per capita. The production capability theory of economic growth also explains why different sectors of the economy across the world tend to show consistently different levels of value added per capita. This is because of the ease with which competitive advantage can be created and appropriated and production efficiency increased in different sectors. In manufacturing, there have historically been many windows of opportunity that have enabled firms to increase their production efficiency and use their technological and organizational capabilities to create and appropriate competitive advantages, with the result that manufacturing firms that are competitive in world markets tend to produce high levels of value added per capita. This has not, however, been the case in agriculture, where it is in most cases very difficult to create an appropriate competitive advantage, and which therefore usually have low value added per capita. And in only a few knowledge-intensive service areas, such as financial and professional services and information technology, have firms experienced windows of opportunity that have enabled them to innovate and create competitive advantage through the use of high-level skills and the spillover of knowledge in clusters. If we now look at the sectoral figures for the UK over the period 2010 to 2019 on this chart, we can see how the production capability theory of economic growth, which I've described, can be used to explain the slow growth of the UK economy over the period 2010 to 2019. What the data in the chart shows is that the slow growth rate of the economy was due to the performance of three major sectors of the economy: manufacturing, financial services, and oil and gas, and a shift in economic activity from high value added to low value added sectors, as shown by a negative between effect of -2.44%. In the case of manufacturing, it suffered a fall in GVA from £55.73 to £52.20, and also saw a fall in the percentage share of total GVA from 10.64% to 9.65%. This was caused by firms in foreign countries rapidly innovating and increasing the competitive advantage of their manufacturing industries faster than our manufacturing industries were doing. In the case of financial services, which is one of the UK's high value added services, the GVA per hour grew by 3.45% between 2010 and 2019. But as a percentage of the country's total GVA, it fell from 5.44% to 3.99%. The average revenues of the leading listed 4 UK banks fell by 17% between 2010 and 2019, as lower aggregate demand in the economy resulted in less demand for financial products. In addition, many of the financial products which had flourished in the boom conditions leading up to the financial crash were seen to have little economic value after the crash. Finally, the oil and gas sector saw a fall in GVA per hour from £681 per hour to £546 per hour, GVA per hour, while its percentage share of the country's GVA fell from 1.51% to 0.72%. The latter figure was due to a fall in GVA per hour and a fall in output by a quarter from the end of 2010 to the end of 2019. Output is predicted to fall further in the future, and downward pressure on the oil price because of the growth of renewable energy and the relatively uncompetitive nature of the sector, of our sector that is, due to high extraction costs, means there's little chance of the sector stimulating UK productivity growth in the future. It is, I think, surprising, in view of the importance for the national growth figures, that so little attention has been paid by economists to the impact of North Sea oil. And I think it's due to the fact, quite frankly, that their model says all sectors are the same, and therefore they don't focus on what is happening in different sectors. In summary, the reason we've had a very slow rate of productivity growth is that because of global competition, the high value-added per capita sectors of our economy are today a smaller share of the economy than in 2000. And the only way we can improve our rate of growth is by increasing the innovation and competitive advantage of the high value-added per capita sectors of our economy. If we want to fully understand the economic challenges we face as a country, we also need to understand that in the world economy, there is a ladder of economic development whose rungs represent products that require increasing amounts of organizational and technological capability, and which produce increasing amounts of value added per capita due to fewer companies being able to reach the higher rungs. It is a ladder that developing countries have to climb by increasing their organizational and technological capabilities if they want to increase their standard of living. No country starts growing by creating a pharmaceutical industry because it doesn't have the capabilities of doing so. And no country in recent years has ever achieved a high GDP per capita by having a cheap garment industry, although that is often a good early step on the ladder. With a narrow view of national competitive advantage involving only input costs and economies of scale, it's very easy for policy debates to degenerate into an us versus them conflict. However, if developed countries understand that there is a ladder of economic development and that they can increase the growth of their economies by rapidly innovating and creating new high value added products and services, while ceding lower value added products and services to developing countries, then all countries can increase their national standard of living. If the pie is bigger, everyone can have a larger slice, and the race to the top enables a country to avoid a zero-sum confrontation with other countries at a similar stage of development. It is therefore important that countries avoid thinking that the best way to compete is by reducing the wages of their labor force or engineering a favorable exchange rate to achieve competitiveness, but instead understand that the way to achieve economic growth is by developing products and services that command premium prices in international markets and can therefore support high wages. Finally, I'd like to say that this debate about models of economic growth is not a pointless academic squabble, but an argument with important implications for policy making. Let me mention three policy implications. Firstly, many neoclassical economists argue that it doesn't matter if the UK loses all its manufacturing jobs and replaces them with service jobs. But as the figures I've shown you make clear, losing high value-added jobs in manufacturing and replacing them with low value-added jobs in services will lead to a fall in GDP. And it is difficult to see any future scenario in the UK where there will be enough high value-added service jobs to replace the loss of all high value-added manufacturing jobs. Any strategy to raise the rate of growth in the UK must include policies to maintain, or better still, increase our high value-added manufacturing sectors. Secondly, the production capability theory of economic growth can also be used to explain the substantial regional inequalities we have in the UK and what we need to do to level up the poorer regions. As work for the Centre of Cities has shown, regional inequality is not simply due to geography. It is not due to workers in the north working less hard than in the south or being less efficient. Nor is it the case that all cities in the north are less prosperous than those in the south. It is, on the contrary, due to the fact that only a few cities in the north, who benefited from being the home of the major industries of the Industrial Revolution, have been able, in the face of fierce foreign competition, to reinvent themselves and move into today's high value-added per capita sectors. Government policies in the past, which have explicitly attempted to reduce the north-south divide, and which can be traced back to the 1930s, have not been effective because the majority of interventions have tended to reinforce the existing industrial structure by supporting low knowledge routine activities to reduce unemployment, as opposed to supporting the reinvention of cities by increasing the number of knowledge intensive businesses in them. As a result, in many cities in the north, jobs in declining industries have been replaced by low-skilled routine jobs, which are vulnerable to foreign competition and technological change. Cotton mills and dockyards have been replaced by call centers and distribution sheds. What therefore we need now urgently to do is to create more high value-added per capita firms and jobs in the lower income regions of the country. And we need to be clear that moving a few civil servants to the north or opening a few free ports to try and attract foreign companies to take advantage of our low wages to manufacture in the UK will do nothing to level up the poorer regions. The only way that the government will be able to level up the lower income regions of the country is by supporting the growth of existing or potential clusters of high value added per capita businesses in them. And to do this, three major policy changes will need to be made. The first change is to give the metro mayors the clear responsibility for spatial planning and transport policies in their cities, bringing their powers in line with those already held by the Mayor of London. The second change is to give mayors the power to align the courses run by FE colleges within their boundaries with the needs of industry. Thirdly, for mainly historical reasons, government R&D spending is heavily concentrated on centres of excellence in southern England, London, Oxford and Cambridge. However, if the high value added private sector is to grow outside these cities, the Chancellor must target more R&D funding at poorer regions. This should not be difficult to do, as it can be achieved by strengthening and altering the recently introduced Strength in Places Fund. These are radical changes, but it should be remembered that regional inequality has proved an intractable problem in the past, and the prize for success is enormous. If the country's underperforming cities closed their output gap, the UK's economy would be nearly 70 billion larger. Finally, if we want to create a dynamic, high value-added economy in our country, it's necessary to understand the enabling role that government needs to play in the economy. Neoclassical economists tend to condemn government efforts to increase innovation through government policies as so-called industrial policies that attempt to pick winners, and claim such efforts have repeatedly failed. But it's important to distinguish between Soviet-style attempts at economic planning that have universally failed and strategic efforts by many countries to intervene appropriately in support of innovation, many of which have been highly successful. The key challenge is, of course, to define precisely what sort of role the government should play. In making this choice, it's useful to think in terms of the continuum proposed by Robert Atkinson and Steve Azell in their book, Innovation Economics. The continuum runs from the political right to the political left, moving from one, leaving it principally to the market, two, supporting necessary inputs such as R&D and skills, three, supporting key broad industries and technologies, to four, picking specific firms and products. Only the last category is equivalent to what neoclassical economists describe as industrial strategy. Historically, no country has gone from poverty to wealth, has done it through market forces alone. At the other end of the spectrum, most economists who've studied national economic growth policies would agree that countries that have depended on picking specific firms or products have not been successful. Picking products that are likely to be commercially successful or picking companies that are going to be profitable requires deep insights into market dynamics, competitive conditions, and customer needs. These are capabilities that even the best civil servants do not have. And once such decisions are in the hands of ministers, they become subject to the distortion of the political process, including pressures from special interest groups and political constituencies. When, however, governments have supported the necessary inputs for innovation, as well as key broad industries and technologies, they've generally been successful. In the United Kingdom today, firms have seen their ability to innovate and grow competitively in world markets eroded by three major institutional failures: in education and training system, in the national system of innovation, and in the financing and corporate governance system. And if we want to increase our rate of economic growth, we need to reform our institutions in these three areas. We live in a world of opportunity and fierce competition. Many windows of opportunity are being opened up by advances in science and technology. And this means that countries with firms that have the capabilities to take advantage of them will be able to innovate, raise their level of competitive advantage, and increase their rates of growth. But if we want the United Kingdom to be a winner in this race to the top, we'll need to adopt a new theory of economic growth and reform the key institutions of our economy. Thank you very much.
Well, Sainsbury, that was great. And I think we're accustomed to debate whether government should be more or less involved in the conduct of industry. And it's a kind of pub conversation because we're not sure. And now it seems to me you've given us some theoretical basis to make those kind of decisions in a more rational way. Questions are starting to come in, but perhaps I can just grab a couple of questions first, cheekily abusing my privilege as chairman. People who follow these things will have noticed that recently the government stood down the Industrial Council. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I think it's more sort of symbolic than it is important in reality. What worries me is that I think we're just going back to a kind of standard neoclassical view of these issues, which says basically all industries, all sectors are the same. It doesn't matter whether it's I think it was one economist said it doesn't matter whether it's potato chips or computer chips. It's all the same thing. All that matters is market efficiency. And I hope that in my talk I've shown that this is just completely wrong. It does matter. Sectors do matter. I think it also shows that they're moving away into a position where effectively is saying what happens. We don't really need to have knowledge of what happens in individual sectors. It can all be handled by the Treasury. BEIS does not have a great deal of industrial knowledge, but it does meet frequently and talk to industry. The Treasury has virtually no industrial knowledge and does not meet with industry ever, I think, to talk about prospects and so on. So I think, again, that is moving in the wrong direction. And it's a direction which I hope my book has shown is exactly the wrong way to go. What you need to have is a very good understanding. If you want to get growth, you need to have a very good understanding of what's happening in different sectors and how you as a government can help to increase the competitiveness and the competitive advantage of these sectors in world markets. And there are things that government can do which are very important. Generic technologies is one. Things like feed-in tariffs for new sources of energy and so on. And if we're going to get rid of all that, it's not going to be good news for our rate of economic growth.
Thanks. Just one more, and then I'll go to the questions coming in. And that's really about what your theories have to say about the role of universities.
Yeah, I think one of the big changes in the last, say, 25 years is that I think it's now been fairly universally agreed that universities have a key role in their local and regional economies. It hasn't escaped people's notice that some of the wealthiest places are ones linked to world-class universities. I mean, typically Oxford and Cambridge in the UK, but also you look at the position of Boston, and everyone would say, well, that's related to particularly having MIT there. And it's important because of for two reasons. One is the diffusion of innovation, which people now begin to realize is extremely important. And also the training, obviously, of scientists, engineers, and other people. So I think it's becoming an increasingly important area. And it's not just about the universities being there, it's about universities having also the mechanisms for transferring the knowledge out of the university into high-tech clusters and firms around them. So it's about technology incubators or startup accelerators or innovation districts. These are now coming to the forefront of the modern knowledge-intensive industry we're talking about.
Great, thank you. Let me move now to questions that are coming in. And George Perendire, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, what do you think about the multilateral measures of inclusive and quality growth as instead of single GDP growth measures?
I guess this is a question about whether you take account in GDP of other factors like environmental issues and so on. I have a rather narrow view of this, I think, which is that it's difficult enough to get agreement about how you measure GDP without, and of course it depends on everyone defining it in the same way, because you can't obviously compare it if people have different measures. And it's difficult enough to get that agreed. If you start bringing all these other things in, I think you'll find that it's impossible to get agreement. And I think it's better to stick and say, look, what GDP measures is simply the generation of wealth. To the extent that other issues are important, and they are extremely important, like the environment and what we're doing to the environment, use other measures to see what is happening to do in those areas. And then the policymakers have to make trade-offs between the two. But I think to try and have a single measure of this would just get into a hopeless muddle and disagreement. Again, it's the same issue. People always say, well, you know, GDP doesn't measure happiness of people. And of course, you know, we should somehow make it measure happiness. But you have the same situation. I mean, it's just not possible to get an agreed definition of happiness and how you measure it. So don't try and confuse that with GDP, which is a limited task, which is difficult enough in its own, which is just measuring wealth.
Thank you. A question from David Connell saying, given that responsibility for innovation policy is spread between BEIS, spending departments like Defence and Health and the Treasury, with frequent changes in ministerial and official responsibilities, what architecture for policy setting and monitoring do we need to effect real change?
Yeah, I think this is a very, if you've ever worked in British government, this is an extraordinarily interesting and difficult question. The answer is we have an absolutely appalling fault line in British government. And the fault line is that the centre of government, in terms of the civil service this is, has no authority over departments. We have a particular system which says that permanent secretaries report to ministers and ministers report to the Prime Minister. And the cabinet secretary, who is supposed to run the civil service, has no authority over departments. And not surprisingly, this causes great difficulty in ever getting the whole of government machinery to work together. And I don't think you'll be able to do this unless you make, well, you have to do two things. One is you have to give some authority to the centre in terms of running the departments. And secondly, you have to have a mechanism, a proper mechanism for coordinating policies across departments. You can't just say, this is in the hands of the minister of the department. And you'll find there aren't any really good processes for coordinating policy across departments. So if you look at the current situation with the levelling up agenda, you might ask yourself, you know, the government is committed to levelling up. Where is in government, is there a group of people who are putting the policy to do this together? Because it doesn't just involve one department. It involves BEIS, it involves the transport department, it involves obviously local government and so on. And you'll find there isn't, as for example at the moment, anyone coordinating a strategy to do this. And you've got to give it to someone, either in the Treasury or the policy unit in Downing Street, to actually coordinate policies across government and give them the authority to make it happen. And if that sounds a long question, it's born of many, many days and hours of experience suffering this particular problem.
Thank you. Margaret Costry, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, asks, does the higher value add from manufacturing only work if the inputs are domestically sourced?
I don't think I don't think it matters. But I mean, the question is, there are two questions. Is if that affects production efficiency, that's a problem. If it affects a competitive advantage, that's a problem. But I don't think in either of those cases it matters whether they're produced domestically or abroad. The question is, do they enable you to get your production efficiency or your competitive advantage?
Thank you. I have a question here from Antonio Andrioni. What do you think about achieving coordination and policy alignment by reforming budgeting processes around cross-departmental missions?
I wouldn't as a whole go down that route. I think it's better to keep it on budgets, on departmental budgets, because that's actually how the government is structured and the authority levels work. And the way to get coordination is by having a mechanism which coordinates what people do, but then delegates that particular, if it's coordinating the work that BEIS does and the work that Department of Transport does, well, then you say, this is the mechanism you've got to have for coordinating it, and this is the way you've got to do it. And you lay that down from the center, and then people have to operate within that organizational framework.
Thank you. And this is a question that is, again, kicked around over a pint of beer, not infrequently. It's from John Scott. So do you think that the method of early stage financing is too focused on a get-rich-quick philosophy? Is the German system of more long-term ownership, possible by families, and more local involvement a better route to success?
Well, I think we do. We do have a problem about we actually have a rather high rate now of startup companies, which are rather good. And then people intend to quite early on, before you've got the full value of this, to sell out to a bigger company or sell out to a company abroad. And I think this is very, very unhelpful. I think there are two things, but there are a number of reasons for this. One is, of course, it's getting the sort of mid-range kind of finance without going on the stock exchange is quite difficult, and we need to do more of that. And I think we need to take, and this is very controversial, I think we need to take a tougher view about takeovers of business by foreign countries. And this again comes back to economic theory. The neoclassical view is that if a foreign company wants to buy a British company and puts up the money to do it, that tells you that it's best that that country, for the world economy, is under the hands of a foreign company. And if that foreign company takes all the intellectual property out of that business and takes it and funds its own operations, that is part of free trade and good for the whole economy. I think that's a very mistaken view. I think you want to make certain that lots of economies have the potential to grow through businesses. And I would take a much tougher view about foreign bids for British companies. I would remind people that I remember taking place and trying to create a row about the Pfizer takeover of AstraZeneca. And the British government's view at that point was, but of course they should be allowed to, if because of tax reasons in America, it is right for, they want to pay a large amount of money for AstraZeneca, so be it. And if that means they move all of AstraZeneca's intellectual property and so on to America, and AstraZeneca falls apart, so be it. In the event, I think, because there was something of a public row, AstraZeneca actually did stand up for this and refused to accept the bid, and the shareholders supported them. But if it had been left to the British government, AstraZeneca would not now exist in England. And it's worth thinking about that in terms of both our economic future, where pharmaceuticals is one of the areas, high value added, which we should be really pushing in, let alone the fact of where we would have been in the current pandemic if we hadn't had AstraZeneca as a big company in this country.
That's a salutary example, isn't it? I now have a question, which is, how would you define competitive advantage? And do you distinguish between firm competitive advantage and national competitive advantage?
Well, I think competitive advantage is very simple. It's that you can make a product which the customers view as more valuable than competing products. An example, Apple iPhone, people love their iPhones for various reasons to do with design, functionality, performance, and they will therefore pay a very high price for this. And as a result of that, Apple value added is extremely high. So I think it's easy to define what it is. I can't remember what the second part of your question was.
It's distinguishing between competitive advantage at the level of the firm and the level of the country.
Now, the key absolute question here, this is where I agree with, I think, neoclassical economists. I mean, the key question is, what is the competitive advantage of all your firms in world markets? That's the key question. There are other questions. There is another question, which is, what happens to your competitiveness? And that as a country, and that depends, of course, on the exchange rate and other things, which can be changed. But what I hope I made clear in my speech is that the key issue is competitive advantage of your firms. You don't solve this issue by getting devaluation, which makes your products cheaper in the markets and so on. That doesn't long-term create you wealth. What creates you wealth is the competitive advantage in firms.
Thank you. Michael Lukin asks, a network of catapults has been created in the UK instead of Maxwell Institutes, which were originally proposed. Some of the catapults have been operating for at least a decade. I'm not sure that's quite right, but anyway. Do you think they're the right instrument for enabling high value sectors in the UK?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's always a question about, I mean, there's always a question about performance as well as about the instrument. And I think we spend too much time changing the instruments and instead of looking very carefully at the performance. Because we have very few people within government who can really assess the performance of institutions. And this doesn't just apply to industrial organizations to help industry. It applies to pretty well all institutions. We tend to set up institutions. No one monitors them. No one intervenes in what they do. And then 5-7 years later, suddenly people wake up to the fact that they aren't working very well. And then the response is we abolish them and we waste 2 or 3 years and we set up another body, which usually looks remarkably similar to it. but has a new name and apparently a slightly new mission, and off we go again. It would be enormously helpful if in this process, instead of doing that, we monitored their performance. And when they're not performing well, we point this out to them and get them to improve their performance. And if the chairman and chief executive can't do that, we sack them and get some people in who can run them. But we never do that. We never do that. We abolish the organization at great cost and then set up another one. And you can see this in all sorts of areas. I mean, the worst example is technical education, where you will see, since the war, we've had probably 6 or 7 major new schemes, new institutions. And every case, we do nothing about monitoring performance. And then we suddenly think this is not working, we abolish it and set up another one with a new name. And it's just a very bad way to proceed. So I think, and if you look at Catapults, I think, but this is only impression, some of them done very well, 1 or 2 of them have done not so well, and no one's done anything really to move in and make them work better.
And somebody called Combined Actors of Cambridge, which I suspect is not a person, but an organisation, can you please point to initiatives of the UK government that have successfully increased innovation?
Yeah, I can. I think but I mean, when I first became minister, I introduced something called the Higher Education Innovation Fund. And that I think you can show dramatically increased the number of spin-off companies from British universities, and is still, I think, going and flourishing and doing well today. So I think that was quite a good policy move. Innovate UK originally started as the Technology Strategy Board when I was a minister. Then I think the government couldn't deal with the idea of something being called Technology Strategy Board, because that looked like sort of picking winners. So it was called Innovate UK. That goes on. I think people would agree that it's a necessary organization. There'll be some queries about how effective it's been, but I think that's mainly due to the fact that for long periods it hasn't had proper person in charge of it because of debates going on in government about paying people proper salaries. Again, it's a case of, it's not the institution, it's the way that the institution is managed. But I think you can point. The small business SBR, I can't even remember whether it's SBRIR or SBRI, which I set up when I was a minister, copied on the American scheme. I think that's been pretty successful, but again, could have done more if there'd be more oversight of it and making it work really well.
Thank you. Last couple of questions, and then we should let you escape. Is there a role for Golden Triangle universities to engage strategically with HEIs and industry to develop knowledge-intensive companies in other parts of the country, rather than develop innovation districts on their doorsteps?
No, I think all the evidence across the world says no. Proximity is the essence of this. The whole point of it is that you have a cluster, and the knowledge diffuses in the cluster around the university, and I don't think you can then go and you lose everything if you try and do that in some other place. The way to do it is to strengthen the university research and the diffusion of innovation from it within the region or city in which it's in. And
a final question, which is more outward looking. The UK is good at new innovation. Are we strong and ambitious enough, in your view, in the way we market and sell our innovative products overseas?
I honestly would say I just simply don't know. I would doubt if that is a lack of marketing or skill in selling them is the real issue. Because I think the main thing with these products is how good they are. You know, the reason Apple sells fantastically around the world is probably not due to much to do with its marketing, though its stores are brilliant. It has really, I mean, in the early days, I think it probably did. I mean, there was brilliant, Steve Jobs had brilliant advertising and promotion of it. But I think today it stands largely on the fact that people like that product. And I think probably, I mean, this is thinking out loud, it probably is the case that with these knowledge intensive products, the performance is much more important than the promotion of them, always compared to consumer durables or you know, food or frozen foods or whatnot, because people, there's a much clearer ability to assess the performance of the product. But I would have to say I wouldn't be dogmatic. I mean, as you can see, I've been dogmatic on practically everything this evening, but on that I wouldn't be dogmatic. I think that's a debatable question.
Well, I think it's pretty much the case that if we followed some of the guidance you've given us, David, we will get good products, innovative products, which people will want to buy, and to some degree, good products sell themselves. Well, can I thank you for a great evening? This is a hugely topical subject, and at a time when there's a great deal of change in government. Sometimes the machinery is unbolted from the floor and you can move it round a bit. And I think we are in such a time now. And to have a novel theoretical foundation for addressing some of these, what I've called barroom conversations, seems to me a huge advantage. And those of you who read the Financial Times will know that Martin Wolf, who's a pretty tough cookie, wrote very warmly about your recent book. So we're very privileged to have had you speak to us. Thank you so much. Thank you to our viewers and our people asking questions. We've had a good slew of questions and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, by the way, also to Lee, who did a great job with her cochlear implant research. Well done, Lee. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Bye-bye.